Hello and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined tonight by Lizzie Eldridge. Lizzie, how are you tonight?
I'm okay, thanks, Kenny.
Well, thanks very much for joining us. Our first story tonight is Cabinet Secretary for Finance, Kate Forbes, has reached an agreement with the Scottish Green Party to ensure passage of the Scottish Government's budget at all stages in Parliament. The final agreement will increase support for young people, police, climate action and local government. Thanking all who took part in the discussions, Ms Forbes said that while she had reached agreement with the Scottish Greens, the budget delivered on key issues raised by all parties in the Parliament and called on all MSPs to unite behind the budget on Thursday. The agreement, which builds on key Scottish Government commitments to invest £15 billion in health and care services, deliver a child poverty payment and to expand early learning and childcare, will deliver a national concessionary travel scheme offering free bus travel for under 18s. The Scottish Government will undertake work on design and due diligence with a view to introducing the scheme in January of next year. Ensure a total uplift for the police service of £60 million in the next financial year, with £13 million of additional investment in frontline services and a further £5 million of additional capital investment. Support local services with £95 million of further funding for local government, taking total additional Scottish Government support for local authorities to £589 million. To further support Scotland's efforts to end our contribution to climate change, a £45 million package of investment in low-carbon projects has been agreed, including £25 million of additional investment in local energy efficiency, £15 million for local authority investment in active travel, £5 million to further develop options for enhanced rail services. And as part of the agreement, the Scottish Government has confirmed that the Infrastructure Investment Plan, which will be published later this year, will be aligned with the Infrastructure Commission's call for all future projects to be compatible with the Scottish Government's net zero target and the Climate Change Act. Confirming the agreement today, Ms Forbes said, "I am pleased to have reached an agreement to pass the budget and deliver certainty for communities, businesses and our vital public services, especially in the face of the uncertainty created by the UK Government's decision to delay its budget. I want to thank all parties for the constructive way in which they have approached this year's discussions. While it is not possible to meet every party's demands in full, I believe in reaching formal agreement with the Green Party. I am also delivering on key asks from every party, and I encourage all MSPs to consider giving their support to Scotland's budget." And commenting on it, Scottish Green co-leader Patrick Harvie said, "Free bus travel for young people is a transformational step towards tackling the climate emergency. This scheme will benefit young people starting college and families, some of whom stand to save thousands of pounds a year, and encourage whole generations of public transport users. Buses are the backbone of local public transport and the key to employment and training opportunities for so many of those starting out in life. Yet again, it's the Scottish Greens who have engaged constructively in the budget process to deliver for communities in Scotland. Clearly, a green budget would do even more to tackle the climate emergency, but securing this important free bus travel deal for the next generation builds on the powers we won for local councils to take control of their local bus services. It is the Scottish Greens who are leading the change. And as we have done in every year we have struck a deal, the Greens have prioritised funding for local government, securing an additional £95 million for libraries, schools and other local services. So, I mean, this is fairly big news. There was obviously the Scottish Government can't pass anything without support from other parties, and the Greens are usually the party that they go to first. And the Greens seem to be fairly happy to have extracted this deal for free bus travel for young people. What's your feeling about this?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I mean, I think promoting public transport, and especially young people, because they're the ones who grow into the future and hopefully continue using it as they become adults. All good.
Yeah, and of course this increase in the police budget, I mean, certainly that's something that the Tories have always pressed for. It's one thing that the Scottish Government in previous years have managed to get deals or at least some sort of agreement with the Tories. So it does seem like a fairly positive thing. And Kate Forbes, I think, deserves particular credit for this. She stepped in on the day the budget was delivered after the Derek Mackay scandal broke. And to have delivered this in apparently fairly smoothly, I think deserves a lot of credit.
Yeah, no, I agree as well.
So we also have a bit of other news about finance in Scotland. The Scottish Parliament has supported the return of £125 million of VAT pocketed from the Scottish Police Service by the Treasury. MSPs at Holyrood have voted in favour of a Scottish Government amendment which supports the return of the £125 million of VAT taken out of the budgets of frontline emergency services, which no other territorial police services in the UK had to pay. The Scottish Government's amended budget proposals would increase the police budget by £60.2 million compared to 2019-20, an uplift of 5.1%. The Scottish Parliament's Justice Committee recently concluded that Police Scotland not being exempt from paying VAT remained a live issue and was still an issue of debate. Rona Mackay MSP said the SNP has consistently called on the UK Government to refund the money owed so it can be reinvested in Scotland's emergency services. The VAT charge for Scottish police and fire services was another Tory policy that was completely unfair to Scotland. They were the only territorial forces in the UK to be charged VAT, costing frontline services millions of pounds. While Police Scotland and the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service may no longer pay VAT, this repayment remains outstanding. The debt must be repaid. With Holyrood voting in favour of the missing £125 million being refunded to our police service, it's time for the UK Government to step up and give Scotland what we are due. And again, this has been a long-running story ever since the regional forces in Scotland were combined into Police Scotland. The VAT has now stopped being the exemption has now been given to Police Scotland, but there is still this money that they paid out that's not being paid back.
And a huge amount.
Yeah, I mean, £125 million, it can't be not to be sneezed at.
Absolutely not. And this is owed by the UK government.
Yeah.
And do you think there's any chance we'll see it again?
Well, I was going to ask you if you thought there was.
I have no idea. Given that there's a slight hostility at the minute between Boris Johnson and the Scottish Parliament, or Nicola Sturgeon, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But it just seems ridiculous. I mean, I didn't realise either that we were the only country that where the police were charged VAT.
Yeah, it was to do with the way that Police Scotland was created. I don't really understand the detail myself, but the regional police forces never did. The Met doesn't, obviously. Like Yorkshire Police doesn't.
Yeah.
But I think it was something to do with the fact that it was becoming a national force. So yeah, it turns out though that all the parties in the Parliament have supported this amendment. So maybe the Tories, maybe Jackson Carlaw can kind of push his colleagues down south to
give the money
pay
back.
it back. Yeah. But yeah, it's just a bizarre story one that. Yeah, would be nice to see the Westminster government do the right thing.
Absolutely, if they can.
If they can, yes, quite. Anyway, moving on. An independent review of the school curriculum must not be a distraction from work to close the poverty-related attainment gap, Deputy First Minister John Swinney has said. The remit for the OECD-led review, due to report in February 21, has been published. It will consider the design and flexibility of the curriculum for excellence, how pupils move through school into the senior phase, and how teachers are supported. Addressing head teachers and key education leaders at Wester Hailes Education Centre, Deputy First Minister John Swinney underlined the progress made in closing the attainment gap through the Scottish Attainment Challenge. Mr Swinney said the Scottish Attainment Challenge works. Head teachers are seeing improvements in closing the poverty-related attainment gap. Attainment is rising across the broad general education, and a record proportion of school leavers are going into further or higher education, work or training. Around the country, I see inclusive and inventive approaches to engage young people in and beyond school, and greater evidence of schools and local authorities collaborating with a wider range of partners. The OECD review will look at the breadth, depth and flexibility of curriculum for excellence. I firmly believe that curriculum for excellence is the right approach, and we will set up a Scottish practitioner forum to capture the views and experience of professionals working with young people. The voice of young people will also be an important part of the review. While every education system must be open to further improvement, I am also clear the review should not be a distraction or create uncertainty. This is a review of the curriculum, not of Scottish education. We have embarked on reforms that are working to close the attainment gap, raise standards and are sustainable for the long term. There is still much to do, but I believe we are on the right track. And Lizzie, I don't know, do you have any young people in your life going through the education system at the moment?
No, no, my daughter's been through it already.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
I mean, what have you been following this story at all? Have you heard anything about this?
No, no, actually.
Yeah. Well, basically, the other parties have been attacking constantly on education, obviously, and there were a report this week that some of the higher results had not been as good as expected. What's your feeling on where Scottish education is generally? I mean, you used to be a lecturer, I believe.
Yes,
Yeah,
I did. I taught in Queen Margaret University over in Edinburgh. I mean, Scotland's always prided itself in its education, and I think rightfully so. We've got our own education system, which has got a pretty good reputation. Where it's at now in the reality of it, I'm not sure. My sister teaches at Glasgow University, and she teaches an access course as well. I think the kind of philosophy of education in Scotland has always been pretty good, and it's always been about trying to promote equality, and state education has always, it depends, doesn't it, on where you are, but my experience having been through state education was good.
Yeah.
And I think any kind of attempts to make education inclusive and to make sure that kids from disadvantaged backgrounds are getting exactly the same as kids from non-disadvantaged backgrounds has to be.
Yeah, I mean that's really the whole point of the attainment challenge. It's £750 million over the course of the Parliament, so £150 million a year, basically going into these schools in the most disadvantaged areas. And we talked actually a little bit yesterday about the widening access that's happening in the universities, and also, as you say, the development of just other paths. College, work, training, all these things are all expanding. I think it's something that we put a lot of focus, I think, on university as if that's the gold standard of what you do after school. But there's just as good opportunities, in fact, some often better opportunities, going into trades and whatnot. And we've seen a huge rise in apprenticeships as well. So I think all of these things, it all has to be kind of taken in the round.
I agree, and also the whole push. I mean, I saw it when I was teaching at universities, the whole push on, education, which meant university at that time. I mean, you had so many people just going to university, and I say just going to university, not necessarily for a reason or a purpose, whether that was vocation-based or otherwise. You just had to go to university, and then you saw the devaluation of degrees, etc., etc. I really like the Swiss model, where more young people go through apprenticeships and come out with a skill and a trade and a profession and a job. Actually, and this is me university educated, and etc., etc. But I like that model because I think it can be really difficult for young people coming out of university with degrees in, say, sociology. I did sociology, theatre. I did theatre. History of art, any of these which are not vocational. And you come out and you spend 3 or 4 years studying and you don't know.
Yeah, there isn't an obvious path to a career.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's a shame because, I mean, I'm a big believer in education for its own sake.
Me too, yeah.
But there is this sense that you've been through university, and especially if you've acquired debt at university, there's a real pressure to find a decent paying job quite quickly.
And you do. I mean, I agree with education for its own sake, but having always believed in that, and I do, there's still that disparity between that and the reality of having to pay your bills.
Yeah, and of course, as time goes on, there's more and more of these kind of skilled jobs that you're expected to get from getting a degree are going to be automatable, whereas things like plumbing and joinery are not going to. Those are not things that we're going to have robots doing for quite a while, I would think. I mean, my mum always said, you never meet a poor plumber.
I said to my daughter, who's now doing a master's in speech and language therapy, and I said to her years ago, if you became a hairdresser, you'd always have work.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is me that comes from you.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. I actually, one of my sister's friends did actually go and learn to be a hairdresser after he graduated.
A brilliant. I think it's brilliant because, you know, the nature of the work I've done, you don't always see the fruit of your results, of your labour. But when you're a hairdresser, you do.
Yeah, yeah.
And you've created it, and it's beautiful, and that person's happy. And I think there's a lot to be said for that.
I think a lot of those trades are just, as you say, just the feeling of having done something and seeing the results right in front of you.
Tangible.
It's really kind of rewarding.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on. Drug users, their families, and people working on the front line to tackle the problem of substance misuse have told 350 delegates at the Scottish Drug Deaths Conference in Glasgow how the issue has affected their lives. The conference at the Scottish Event Campus was coordinated by the Scottish Government and Glasgow City Council. It was organised ahead of the UK Drug Summit to ensure the voices of those with lived experience were heard. In addition to presentations and question and answer sessions throughout the day, there was an opportunity for guests to see a demonstration model of a safer drug consumption facility and have training in the use of naloxone, which can reverse the effects of an opioid overdose. Becky Wood, who has lived experience, said, "I think that there needs to be public discussion. We need to know that our politicians and our clinicians in this field of addiction are hearing what's going on in Scotland. Our country should know that the number of drug deaths are an important issue and it is being taken seriously by both the government and people working in this field. These are our people and they are dying. People are needing support. Life is hard and they should know we are listening. There isn't just one answer to this issue. There is a range of different things and we're hearing about that. I think it's a really good thing for us to hear." And then, Lizzie, this is, again, this has been an ongoing topic for quite a while now. The Scottish Government is very keen to open safe consumption facilities, particularly in Glasgow and Dundee, where there have been a spike in drug deaths. And it's been blocked by Westminster because drug policy is reserved. What's your take on this? Do you think safe consumption facilities are the way forward? Or?
Yeah, actually, yes. I mean, you used to have, and I think you still do, methadone clinics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anywhere that people, I mean, you're not going to stop addicts taking the drug. You know, you're not going to just stop them.
Yeah.
And when people are taking drugs, the safer mode in which they can do it, the better.
Yeah.
It's not, you know, I know the Tory arguments about it, it's condoning it or promoting it, whatever else. No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's just giving people a safe environment with clean needles or whatever else.
Yeah, people don't tend to become heroin addicts
because they
wanted to.
Yes,
you know,
or because, oh look, there's a safe place in which I can become a heroin addict.
Yeah.
Not really.
Yeah, it's like they wouldn't have become addicts if there wasn't a space to inject.
Yeah. Exactly.
And as well, the naloxone, if that becomes more available and more usable for ordinary people, then we can reduce the number of deaths from overdose as well.
You're also reducing accidents that can happen when addicts leave needles or so on in parks where kids can find them or whatever else, you know, so it's got other
there's all those other benefits. And of course, if somebody's coming into a safe consumption facility, then you have an opportunity to intervene. You have an opportunity to say, hey, look, you're trying to help yourself by being here. You know, how about you help yourself by reducing your intake?
Because you've got experts on hand as well, and I assume that would be part of it actually, that there would be advice and care and guidance given to people who are using the safe zones. So yes, I'm for it.
So what do you think is stopping it? What do you think is that Tory mentality that keeps saying no to it? Is it just that they? Is it just a moralising thing? Because they surely must see the same evidence we do that these things work.
Not being a Tory, it's difficult for me to difficult for me to know.
Difficult to put your health
well,
in
I
mind
assume
state,
it's a moral thing,
Yeah.
which is totally, hypocritical given the number of right-wingers that probably dabbled in drugs or still do.
Oh, well, I mean,
to be quite honest.
we know Boris Johnson dabbled in cocaine as a younger man.
Well, there you go.
And may have carried on, I don't know.
Well, we know they're hypocrites.
Yeah.
So it's also the majority of people who will use these safe spaces will presumably be people with lower income, unlike them who can safely take their cocaine or whatever else, or heroin actually, in the safety of their rich parties. So I think it is just that hard line, anti-drugs message, drugs are bad, but it's never helpful.
Yeah. I mean, it's just bizarre. It's never the solution. But
no, all my life that's been the message.
Yeah.
Don't do drugs, and people are
still
doing drugs, obviously.
Yeah. Anyway, in Westminster, Ian Blackford MP has challenged Boris Johnson to listen to Scotland's business sector, which has condemned the UK government's damaging immigration plans. Speaking at Prime Minister's questions, the SNP Westminster leader said Boris Johnson should admit it was a mistake to reject the Scottish Government's proposals for a Scottish visa system, which have been welcomed by businesses, public services and key industries. Commenting, the SNP Westminster leader said, "This week we learned 40% of small businesses in Scotland employ EU nationals. Immigration is crucial for Scotland's economy. So it's no wonder the Scottish Government's proposal for a Scottish visa system have been welcomed by businesses, public services and key industries across the country. Even the Scottish Tories think it's a good idea. Yet the Prime Minister rejected these proposals within a few short hours. Scottish Care has said the Prime Minister's damaging immigration plans could shut the door on enabling people to be cared for in their own homes. The General Secretary of the GMB Union says the plans could genuinely tip some businesses over the edge. Scotland's National Farmers Union have said their evidence has been disregarded by the UK government, and the Scottish Tourism Alliance say the plans will be devastating for Scotland's workforce. Senior figures in the UK government have said what the Scottish Parliament decides doesn't matter one jot. If the Prime Minister thinks the Scottish Parliament doesn't matter, do Scottish businesses matter? And this is, again, this refusal of the Westminster government to listen to what people in Scotland are saying. This is not, as Ian Blackford points out, it's not just the SNP, not just the Scottish government making this call. It's businesses across the spectrum. It's all the parties all saying Scotland needs immutration, and yet there is just this absolute refusal to think about doing things differently. Again, what's your try and put yourself in that Tory mindset? What do you think is it that's stopping them?
Well, this one I think goes back a long way to when Thatcher ignored Scotland. I mean, why would you bother with Scotland anyway? We voted to stay in the European Union. We didn't vote for Boris Johnson. Why would Westminster bother with Scotland? Why should they care about us? They never have done in the past. We were always the guinea pigs. We got the poll tax first, etc. So this one is just another example to me of their utter disregard, contempt, maybe for Scotland. They don't need us. We don't keep them in their jobs. We don't keep Boris Johnson in his job. We don't vote for him. So as a kind of maybe punishment, I don't know if that's too strong, but maybe not, they behave like this.
And do you think, there seems, I think, to have been a bit of a change, even between Theresa May and Boris Johnson, certainly from David Cameron compared to Boris Johnson, where they're not even trying to hide that sense of contempt anymore. They're as they said, it doesn't matter a jot what the Scottish Parliament says. It's hard to imagine any other kind of world leader saying, well, that part of my country doesn't matter.
Apart from Trump.
Well, possibly. But, what is there just a contempt for, do you think that contempt for Scotland has always been there, or do you think it's grown with Boris Johnson?
I think there was always a slight contempt because we just didn't fall in line. And we're a different country, a different mentality, different voting patterns, different everything. But the contempt with Boris Johnson, I mean, when I mentioned Trump, I'm being serious. When you have got a prime minister who in nobody's eyes, a rational person, should ever be prime minister. And yet he's prime minister and he's in there and he's doing what he wants, like Trump, sticking two fingers up to anybody who opposes him. And that's how he operates. And I find it extremely scary. You know, I think it was very frightening when he came in immediately post-Brexit and he decides at his blinking press briefing, these journalists can stay and these journalists go, and you say, no. I mean, at least all the journalists, you know, came together and
solidarity
walked out. Yeah,
walked
thank
out,
goodness. But that kind of behaviour is that disregard and contempt for anything, everything and anyone. And Boris Johnson is a very dangerous man.
Yeah, I mean, those kind of attacks on the free press are very often, I mean, it's something, it was one of the things that Trump did even before he was elected, but then went on to really ramp up, once he was in office. And it seems like kind of making the press kowtow is the first stage before doing other kind of moves into authoritarianism. Is that kind of where you see Boris Johnson going?
Yes. Yes, definitely. I mean, all the goings on at the BBC as well, and a suppression of stories within the BBC. I mean, I've just come back from 12 years from living in Malta, where we have government-owned and government-controlled media. And it's consumed en masse by the majority of people in the country. So you really have got direct propaganda going on. This is a fantastic, easy way to stop freedom of information, because you just stop the channels that provide it. To have a totalitarian view of the world, and if you don't have any alternative, if we compare it to Britain, if I'm only reading The Sun or The Mirror, that's all I know. Now you can accuse me of being lazy because there are choices. But that's the kind of path I think Boris Johnson and his horrible advisor Dominic Cummings and Trump, that's the path they go down. It's one way of seeing the world, and it's my way or the highway, to use a real cliche. But that's what they're about, and the media become the enemy. And Boris Johnson uses that language, Trump uses that language, in Malta the government has used that language. The language of enemies and traitors has become prolific now. But it's not that kind of stuff, you know, it goes back to the Second World War. That kind of language, it's so dangerous, and Boris Johnson is part of that. And he loves it. I mean, that's the kind of language he feels very comfortable.
Well, we will talk a little bit about Malta later in the show, because I know you've got a lot to talk about. But we will move on now. And Michel Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator with the UK, has reiterated that the so-called Canada Plus option will not be on the table in the new round of trade talks due to start on Monday. Barnier said Britain would have to accept so-called level playing field guarantees of fair competition to gain super preferential access to the EU market of 450 million people. The UK says that it wants Canada, but the problem with that is that the UK is not Canada, Barnier told an event at the European Parliament. This is because of Britain's proximity to the EU and the much larger trade volumes it has with the EU than with Canada, he said. We are ready to offer the UK super preferential access to our own markets, he said, adding it would be unprecedented for any foreign country. Is this really something we can do without firm guarantees that the UK will respect the level playing field and avoid unfair competitive advantages? The answer, I'm afraid, is simple. We cannot. Barnier said the EU would never risk unravelling the single market and that modern trade deals were also about labour, environmental, competition and other sustainability standards. He warned Britain not to disregard agreements already sealed between the two sides as part of the divorce proceedings on the level playing field, the Irish border and future cooperation on foreign policy and defence. Barnier stressed there would be tangible change from 2021 when the current status quo transition ends. From January 1st, 2021, there will be checks on all UK goods entering the single market, he said, adding that France and the Netherlands have each hired an additional 700 customs officials, while Belgium has added 400. And this, again, it's something we've been dealing with for, well, ever since the Brexit vote in 2016, the UK saying what it wants and the EU saying, no, that's not possible. Is there any way that these two sides are going to come to an agreement that suits both of them, do you think?
They haven't managed so far, so I don't see really why they will.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just the beginning of the post-Brexit UK, isn't it?
Yeah.
UK, what am I saying? I doubt it. I mean, I think Boris Johnson has started with an anti-European outlook. Why would you? Which already puts things on a bad footing. I mean, I think the UK rightfully really annoyed the European Union because the UK was so bad at negotiating and so bad at what they were about.
Yeah.
Which doesn't bode well for the future either.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard several times that France in particular has been pressing quite hard for the EU to be harder on Britain. They felt on that, for example, they shouldn't have kept giving delays on the actual departure date. And now we heard yesterday that they were pushing for on agriculture standards, I think it was, or food standards, that they would have to meet EU standards because if they were to lean towards American standards, it would risk, horrible chlorinated chicken and whatnot flowing in from the US into Britain and then from there into the EU. Do you think there's what do you think is wrong with the UK government that they keep having what the EU calls cakeism, this idea that they can ask for whatever they want and get it without ever having to give up anything on their own side? What is it about Britain that's causing that? Because again, is it just that Boris Johnson doesn't know any better, or do you think their goal is to somehow end up with nothing, end up being able to walk away saying, well, we tried our best, but the EU just won't listen to Britain? Do you have any idea what the goal is?
I'm not sure that there is a goal because I'm not sure that they're that forward planning. I think there's a complete and utter arrogance about what they're doing. I think the arrogance is always there, and from let's face it, Boris Johnson, private school educated, comes from that whole tradition, which is still rooted in some notion of Britain as an empire and all this garbage. So I think that it's rooted in that. I really don't think there is a particular aim in mind. It could be, as you say, that they walk away and say, well, we tried with the stupid Europeans because, it fits into their way of thinking. I'm not sure. I just think it's just they do things kind of on the hoof. They like to get angry. They like to kind of go, da-da, look at us. And I'm not sure if it extends any further than that. Maybe it does. Maybe they have got some kind of roadmap. What it is, I've no idea. What it is for us is catastrophic.
Yeah, it's a very strange one. We will obviously keep following that. Those talks, as I said, due to start on Monday, so I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about next week. But also in London, witnesses at the Grenfell Tower public inquiry will be allowed to give evidence without incriminating themselves, the government has announced. Suella Braverman, the Attorney General, said that staff of companies and organisations involved in the disastrous refurbishment would be able to give oral evidence about how the tower was clad with combustible materials without it being used by police and prosecutors to later charge them with criminal offences. Detectives are investigating possible crimes ranging from breaches of the Health and Safety Act to manslaughter in relation to the 14th of June 2017 disaster at the West London Council block, which killed 72 people. Survivors and the bereaved said the decision made them nervous. "We can't help but worry about how this will impact prosecutions later," said a spokesperson of Grenfell United, the community group. "It's clear that corporate lawyers are playing every trick in the book." The second phase of the inquiry, investigating those refurbishment works, was halted on the 4th of February by a demand for protection from lawyers for architect Studio E, the cladding contractor Harley Facades, current and former employees of the main contractor Ryden, and officials at the Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation. They threatened that their clients would not otherwise give evidence, in a move attacked as sabotage by lawyers for the bereaved and survivors. The inquiry hearings had only restarted 8 days earlier after a break of more than a year. Michael Mansfield QC, representing one group of bereaved survivors and residents, said it had caused immense anxiety, distress and anger. He opposed the granting of the undertaking on behalf of his clients. Another group of bereaved and survivors stayed neutral on the matter. The first phase of the inquiry, investigating the night of the fire last year, concluded that the aluminium composite cladding panels made by the US industrial giant Arconic and applied to the building were the main cause of fire spread. The Attorney General's decision means the inquiry will now restart at 10 a.m. on Monday after a delay of almost a month to consider the demand for the undertaking. And clearly this is something that is going to be difficult for the survivors and the families of the people who died to hear. What's your feeling on this? Is it more important that the people are able to tell the truth to the inquiry without incriminating themselves, or do you think they should have to kind of stand behind their actions, and if they say what happened, they should be responsible for it?
Well, responsibility is always paramount. I think if you tell the truth, and the truth you're telling is about a criminal offence, you must be held culpable. You know, I think we live in an era where the taking of responsibility has gone out of fashion. Politicians don't take responsibility. I mean, look at Boris Johnson over the coronavirus stuff, whether or not you believe that it's as serious as it is. But he's not there giving out information in the same way as Trump is always down at some golf course or his beach house, wherever he is, when major things are happening. And I think I cannot imagine a situation in which I'm allowed to stand and give evidence that incriminates me and there's not some comeback. If that's the only way I can be forced to tell the truth, if I'm let off scot-free.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite puzzling though, because the Attorney General did say that this wouldn't prevent prosecutions later. It's just that this evidence wouldn't be able to be used against them. So essentially they would be treated as if they had never said anything, because you're entitled not to self-incriminate. So evidence given at this wouldn't be able to be brought up in a later trial, but it's clearly going to be very, very difficult for the survivors and the bereaved families if they hear somebody say at this inquiry, well, actually it was my fault, and then at a trial they refuse to testify because they don't want to self-incriminate. I mean, that's going to be a really difficult square to circle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a really difficult thing to deal with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't know how it works, not being any kind of legal expert, but how you can at one point say, well, actually, because of my negligence or my company's negligence or the fact that this was not suitable material, and I can say this and never have to say it again, because it's as if it didn't exist in a way. I don't know how that works.
Yeah, it's going to be a really challenging thing, and obviously once the evidence comes out, I mean, I think it seems very likely that people are going to say things that are self-incriminating, because otherwise, why would their lawyers demand this kind of protection? So I think it's going to be a very, very painful time, I think, for the survivors and the families. But as I said, the inquiry begins again on Monday. I'm sure we'll report on what comes out. But also in the US, Bernie Sanders' electability was a prime topic at last night's Democratic presidential debate in South Carolina. Rivals contended that his ambitious policy ideas, such as Medicare for All, which would replace private health insurance with something much more like the NHS, would be an electoral catastrophe, costing the party the White House and control of Congress. But the latest polls show Sanders' rising momentum in the race, with a near win in Iowa, a narrow victory in New Hampshire, and a decisive win in Nevada, has given him a lot more credibility with Democratic voters, while head-to-head polls with Donald Trump have for months shown Sanders as probably the candidate most likely to defeat him in November's general election. Saturday's South Carolina primary will be the first major test of Sanders' appeal among African American voters, who represent about 60% of that state's Democratic electorate. 3 days later, 14 states, including California and Texas, will cast ballots on Super Tuesday, when Sanders could build an overwhelming advantage if he captures the lion's share of the available delegates. Former Vice President Joe Biden got a boost today when influential South Carolina Congressman Jim Clyburn endorsed him. Biden's strategy has relied heavily on his support amongst older black voters, and if he can't win in South Carolina, his campaign will be in serious trouble. Former Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who performed very well in Iowa and New Hampshire, is expected to come a cropper in South Carolina, given his terrible polling with black voters. Meanwhile, Senator Elizabeth Warren's past came back to bite her, as more than 200 citizens of the Cherokee Nation and other Native American groups signed an open letter calling on her to address her false claims of Native heritage earlier in her career. Warren apologised for this around a year ago when preparing her run for the presidency, but her reliance on family stories, DNA tests, and her grandfather's high cheekbones to defend her claims in the past have caused serious offence, for which many Native Americans feel she has never fully atoned. Have you been following the American elections at all?
Not really, except hoping that Trump doesn't get voted in again. It's funny, actually, just to mention Pete Buttigieg is Maltese.
Yeah, his father is Maltese.
Origin.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I mean, part of me thinks, given the manipulation of elections and given the manipulation of the election which Trump won, it's kind of funny because we talk about, Bernie Sanders is doing well here, and I think, what does this all mean now in the context, in the world in which we live, in the Cambridge Analytica world? What does it all mean now? But nevertheless, it's always good and positive and encouraging to think that Trump, come November, may no longer be whoever replaces him, which has got to be optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things Sanders said last night, and I mean, I recommend that anybody who with any interest in American politics don't watch the debate from last night. It was awful.
Why?
They just shouted over each other the whole time. It was just dreadful.
Okay.
But there was one really interesting moment where Bernie Sanders talked about the Medicare for All, this idea of a universal healthcare system. And he said, people talk about this as if it's a radical idea, but virtually every other country in the world does this. He says, we're the odd ones out. Do you have any idea why America is so hostile? Or at least why the American establishment? I mean, the people actually generally like the idea.
Well, I'm not surprised.
But what is it about the American establishment that is just so terrified of a universal healthcare system?
Isn't it to do with the power and lobbying of pharmaceutical companies and the money that they make off it? Because there must be massive amounts of money being made for private healthcare over there.
It just baffles me that lobbying can be that powerful when voters are saying, but this is what we need. It's the leading cause of bankruptcy in America is medical bills. I mean, we just can't imagine something like that happening here. And yet over there, you know, people have to sell their homes to pay for cancer treatment. People die because they can't afford insulin. It's just something that's unimaginable for us, and I kind of want to, you know, be able to show them what the NHS is like. I mean, the NHS isn't perfect, but
at least we have it.
But at least we have it. At least, you know, I know that I'm never going to have to worry about affording insulin. It's a very strange thing, and every American that comes over here, they all say the same thing. They say, well, this is brilliant. You know, they won't hear a word against the NHS. So yeah, it's a very, very strange thing.
But then the people that would benefit, everybody, from free healthcare, and not the people with the money.
Yeah, that's very probably the case. In other US election news, the Markup website has published research showing how Google's Gmail system categorized emails from political campaigns. It found that 63% of emails from the Buttigieg campaign reached users' primary inbox. The Andrew Yang campaign came second with 46%, but others, including Elizabeth Warren, found that none were getting through. Overall, only 11% of emails from campaign groups reached the main inbox. Half went to the Promotions tab, intended for advertising, while 40% went to spam. It's unclear why some emails were being diverted and others not. And spokespeople for several campaign groups expressed concern about how Google's algorithms might be affecting democracy if certain candidates and platforms were favoured over others. And again, you mentioned, you know, the being in the Cambridge Analytica world. I mean, these algorithms are things that we have no access to. We have no idea how these decisions are being made. Google were not very forthcoming in explaining how this was happening. What's your take on this about how things are ending up in spam folders? I mean, even there was even one from change.org where people's password reset emails were going into spam, which seems odd. So what's your feeling on that? Do you think there's something sinister there, or do you think it's something that just some glitch that can be probably corrected, or even just not worried about?
I think we have to worry about it. I have to worry about it completely. I mean, you've got the journalist Carol Cadwalla at the minute, and she exposed the way in which data was mined from Facebook in connection with the whole Brexit campaign. And she's being still taken to court by Aaron Banks as we speak.
Yeah.
You know, a multi-billionaire who was behind the UK Leave campaign, I think. I never remember the name of which particular one. The role that these big internet companies play in terms of how we get our information and the kind of information we get is massive. And you sound a bit like a crazy conspiracy theorist, but actually it's how it is what is going on here. I mean, just recently, and this is innocuous. Well, is it innocuous? I don't know. But because I've just moved house, so I'm looking for things like, you know, furniture and stuff. I am tired of opening up my Facebook and just being hit with adverts.
Yeah.
And it seems even more than normal, actually, because it's like, no, come on, I must get a bit of information from Facebook and not just, here's a great lamp or here's a chair, because actually I really don't care.
Yeah.
And I wish it would go away. And I've noticed that this has happened more intensely than before, because often you realise, you know, if you look up, I don't know, something about some country somewhere, Bulgaria, and then you get all this stuff about Bulgaria. But with this, it's actually now really, really annoying me, because it's so fast and furious. That's a small and possibly innocuous thing.
Yeah.
But when it comes to other kinds of information and how that information is being generated and how it's being used and the kind of information that we're getting, whether we want it or not getting, is a whole new ballgame.
Yeah.
And we've now shifted into the territory of Boris Johnson, of Trump, of these crazy people who should never be anywhere near anything public, let alone in the powerful positions that they're in.
Yeah.
But they're there. Something quite different is happening now. So yes, I think we should be extremely concerned.
Yeah.
And again, it's about freedom of information and all of these things, and connects with restrictions on journalists and so on, with Carol Cadwallader, for example.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really fascinating subject. We talked about this a bit on the show yesterday as well, about the kind of way the algorithm will lead you down a rabbit hole, especially on YouTube. You know, you look at one relatively mild right-wing political video, and you know, a couple of hours later you're watching, you know, actual neo-Nazis, because it just the next thing it recommends is always just that bit more extreme. And it's a really something that we probably do need to get a grip of, but sadly the people who know enough are not in power, or they are in power and know but want to use it for their own ends.
Yeah.
Anyway, our last story from Scotland is that Culture Secretary Fiona Hislop today chaired a summit on visas for international festivals. She was joined by senior representatives from the Welsh and UK governments, the Northern Ireland executives, and members of the culture community from across the UK to discuss potential solutions to immigration barriers faced by international artists coming to participate in our world-renowned festivals. The Scottish Government and festival organisers in Scotland have regularly raised concerns with the UK Government about challenges faced by international artists and performers navigating an immigration process which is lengthy, complex and costly. Key members of Scotland's culture sector are calling on the UK Government to take immediate action, such as designating an organisation with expert knowledge of culture in Scotland to endorse visas for performers, extending the permitted paid engagement scheme to a period longer than 1 month to make performers' visits to the UK more viable, expanding the permit-free festivals scheme, which allows overseas performers to take part without needing a certificate of sponsorship under the points-based system, to include smaller festivals with a minimum of 5 international performers and an audience of 10,000, introducing a streamlined, digitised and accessible application process that is less costly and without passport retention whilst awaiting a decision, considered case handling with real-time updates and named contacts to liaise directly with applicants to resolve issues, allowing touring artists to switch from one type of visa to another without leaving the UK. The UK Government's immigration proposals have caused concern in many sectors across Scotland's economy. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has written to Prime Minister Boris Johnson inviting him to meet representatives from key sectors in Scotland to discuss how to prevent serious and lasting harm to Scotland's economy. The letter highlights a number of industries which will be significantly affected by the new immigration policies, including tourism and hospitality, which play a vital role in supporting the success of Scotland's festivals. And of course, this is related to the story we discussed earlier about the immigration rules. These are, you know, things like the Edinburgh Festival are a huge part of Scotland's culture, a huge money spinner as well. And yet the UK government seems to be making it harder and harder for the top talent from around the world to actually get into the country. What's your take on this?
Appalling. What else is there to be said? I mean, I remember when the Brexit referendum happened and people in certain places voted yes. And somebody I know, because my field is art and culture and literature, who has a theatre company, and the loss of Europe was the loss of access to EU funds for him. And that was a very immediate and direct consequence. And the idea that people coming to perform at festivals here need visas, I mean, you just wouldn't, I mean, unless you were really, really adamant that you wanted to come to the Edinburgh Festival or the Edinburgh Fringe, if it costs money, that is a laborious application process. Artists don't particularly like filling in forms at the best of times, let alone for a visa on top. You've applied for the funding or whatever, and now you have to do this. And these are just, yet again, more consequences of a really stupid referendum in the first place, of a really appalling situation that we're now in when we're not in the EU. I'm still can't really get over this. Yeah. I had to go on the government website recently, and it was saying we're no longer in the EU, and you go, oh God, no, we're not. Yeah. And this kind of thing, I mean, given that the referendum, so much as it was a real thing, happened in 2016. These are the kind of things that should have been, ironed out along the way, not left to the last minute.
Yeah.
I mean, it's now February and the Edinburgh Festival is in August.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it goes both ways as well. I mean, I have a couple of friends in bands who are now saying, well, touring Europe is not really going to be an option anymore because they would have to get visas in order to be able to perform.
I saw about this as well, and it costs about 200 odd quid or something.
So I've got one pal who's getting his band off to go all summer this year. Mm-hmm. They want to just go and visit every part of Europe they can get to, everywhere they can get a gig, because they figure it might be their last chance. It's such a shame. Uh-huh. But anyway, as you said, you are just back from Malta not very long ago. Now, we have covered this story on the show before. You've been on several times to talk about it. This is the murder of Daphne Caruana Galizia, is that right? Yeah. She was a journalist murdered 3 years ago now, 2 years?
2017, October,
so
16th of October.
Yeah. And now there have been people charged with that murder. The connections in politics have kind of been exposed. The Prime Minister has now resigned. So just tell us a bit about what's going on now, where the case stands, and what we can expect to happen next.
Okay, well, what's happening now? So as you say, the Prime Minister, Joseph Muscat, resigned in December, but gave himself 6 weeks in which to actually implement his resignation. Mm-hmm. During that time, he spent 3 days in Dubai on a family holiday. Most of that time was obviously spent travelling. Mm-hmm. And the tickets for his family holiday amounted to more than €20,000, which is over a third of his declared annual income. Mm-hmm. Dubai is also the home of, it's a lovely place for money laundering, and it's where an offshore company called 17 Black was based. At least I'm pretty sure it was based in Dubai. This company belongs to a guy called Jürgen Fenech, who's currently been charged with complicity in the assassination of the journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia. So off he goes to Dubai with his family. The tickets for this 3-day trip were bought by somebody in Jordan. So you want to know who bought those tickets and why. He did his farewell tour in Malta, Joseph Muscat, the ex-Prime Minister, everybody crying, so sad to see him go. He resigned under a cloud of suspicion for his part in the assassination. He remains under suspicion, but he's also free. I mean, he's travelled to London, he goes wherever he likes. He's a backbencher at the minute as well, and his power is very much there in the new Prime Minister, who was described himself as the continuity candidate. So let's continue the corruption from the past, and let's keep going in the same vein. To kind of try and, because so much happens in Malta on a daily basis. Yeah. At the moment, you have the trial you have the middleman called Melvin Toma, who was the go-between between Jürgen Fenech, who's one of the richest men in Malta, and the three men who are on trial for planting and detonating the bomb. And Melvin Toma was the kind of go-between. He was given a pardon by the Prime Minister, but the Prime Minister is incriminated in the assassination. So it's pretty messy stuff. the Prime Minister's right-hand man, who also resigned and was arrested, albeit briefly, and then released without explanation, is being incriminated. I mean, his name comes up all the time. Jürgen Fenech described him as a co-conspirator or mastermind. The Caruana Galizia family gave the police in Malta Keisha Kembry's name as the first name after she was assassinated. So his name has always been there, and he's still walking around freely, despite the fact that the lead investigator on the case says that he's under investigation. If I'm under investigation for a major assassination, I'd hope I'd be under police, I'd be in police custody, yet he's not. Talking of the police, the other week, and this was given international coverage in the New York Times, here in the UK, everywhere. You have the traffic police in Malta, which is one division consisting of 50 police officers. 41 of these officers were arrested for fraud. 41 out of 50 traffic police. It's just another story. I mean, bananas kind of story. So arrested for fraud because they were engaged in all kinds of things. They were siphoning off fuel for personal use. They were putting in for overtime that they never did over several years, so amassing thousands of euro in overtime. They were accepting bribes from construction companies, so the police waved a blind eye to illegal construction work in return for money. And some of them were offering sexual favours to women, or waive your traffic fine. I mean, it's really gross stuff. The new acting police commissioner, because the last police commissioner resigned and we wanted him to resign, off he goes. The new acting commissioner was head of the traffic police when this stuff was happening. It just goes on. Stuff coming out in the public inquiry. So you have the criminal trial going on, and then you have the public inquiry, which was set up to establish whether the assassination could have been prevented and what role the state played in it. Everything that's coming out from there and it's not a criminal inquiry, so nobody's going to go to prison for it. But all the stuff that's coming through there, coupled with the information and the testimonies being given in the criminal trial, is stomach churning. It places the government at the heart of that assassination. Everything does.
It's just incredible. I mean, we were saying just before the show, when I thought, before I met you, when I thought of Malta, I thought of this kind of quite nice wee tourist trap. Not very much happening, not very dramatic, not very interesting. Just a nice, pretty little place you could go on a holiday. But it is just remarkable the degree of corruption that you've talked about, that's been unveiled as part of this investigation. And obviously a tragic case for the Caruana Galizia family, but the fact that some of this stuff is now starting to be uncovered and hopefully some of it being addressed.
And the thing is, so when you say stuff being uncovered, Daphne had uncovered so much of it. So her assassination and the things that she was uncovering and the people involved in the things that she was covering is all interlinked. And the family have been fighting for justice for day one, and they've never stopped. I mean, they were the ones that first said we need a public inquiry. It needs to be independent, and that's what they said right from the start. Last week in the European Parliament, on coinciding with the 2-year anniversary of the murders of Jan Kuciak and his fiancée in Slovakia, in the European Parliament they unveiled a statue which was in memory of Daphne Caruana Galizia, Jan Kuciak and his fiancée Martina. And it was very moving, with MEPs saying, we will not rest until there is justice. End of story. Vera Jouronova, who's the head of the European Commission, has also given her promise about things such as the protection of journalists and preventing things like slap actions being taken, which is when you a very powerful person, we were talking about Carol Cadwalladr earlier, somebody like Aaron Banks files a lawsuit at you, and it's mega expensive for you
to defend it.
And
that stops you. It's kind of a chilling effect.
Yes, it is a chilling, and that's exactly what they did with Daphne Caruana Galizia as well. She had 48 lawsuits filed against her when she was assassinated.
Yeah,
most of them from
even
politicians.
with all of that, they still felt they had to kill her to stop her.
And the people who were filing the lawsuits, many of those names, or some of those names, are people who are now incriminated in her assassination.
Yeah. It's a horrendous story. Thank you so much for reporting on it for us. And I'm sure as the story progresses, the trial and the inquiry go on, we will have you back on to talk about it. I hope you'll be able to come back.
Definitely.
But that's all we've got time for tonight. Thanks obviously to Lizzie for joining us. Thank you for joining us as well. It's always a pleasure to have an audience for these shows. If you're able to support us in any way, we would love to have that support. Your eyeballs on the show is great, but if you've got a wee bit of money to spare, that would be very, very welcome. If you're able, please go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up as a supporter. Your £5 a month will make a huge difference to the quality, the quantity, and the type of programs we can produce here. If you can't support us financially, don't feel bad about it at all. The shows will always be free to view online. That's what they're there for. But do please tell your friends about us. Follow us on the Twitter at Broadcast Scot. Follow us, find our Facebook page and follow us there. And let people know that you watch the show, that you enjoy the shows, and that that where we are, what we do. That's a big part of it, because we can't afford to advertise ourselves. And also, if you are interested at all in getting involved in making television, then please let us know. There are lots of roles here, whether that's producing, being a journalist and writing up these stories, whether it's producing graphics and whatnot to help spice up the show a little bit, or whether it's working behind the camera, working in sound, working in vision, whatever it is. There are lots of things that need to be done here if we're going to develop into the kind of independent broadcaster that Scotland deserves. So please, if you or anyone you know has an interest in getting involved in producing television, or whether you have some skills, maybe you're a retired journalist or something that wants to just keep your hand in, then do please let us know. There's lots of roles available. We're never going to stop asking for people to come and get involved here. So please do get involved. It's only with your help that we can become the broadcaster that Scotland deserves. But that is all we've got time for, so that's all from me for this week. Gordon will be back tomorrow at the same time. But thanks once again to Lizzie. It's been a pleasure as always. And thank you again, and until tomorrow, have a great night.